So I realized that I had not put anything up about debate theory for a while, and I was talking with a friend and remembering a funny story, and it reminded both of us of a debate theory controversy that more or less sorted itself out back in the 1980s, although a few people have tried to resurrect it since then, and it's the idea of an intrinsicness argument. What affirmatives would sometimes do to answer disadvantages is they would say that the disadvantage is not intrinsic to topical action, not intrinsic to the resolution. To give you an example, let's say you're out touring, visiting college campuses, and you happen upon the college of your dreams. It's got exactly the major you want, you meet the faculty, you see what the courses are going to be like, you see what the study abroad options are, what the collaborative research options are with the faculty. You absolutely love it. And then you go and you look at one of the dorm rooms and you say, oh, I don't like the dorm room, I'm leaving, not coming here. Well, that would be pretty silly. I mean, if it's a really, really good school, a really good fit for you otherwise, then just look around at some of the other dorms or look into some other housing options. Maybe you could live somewhere nearby off campus. There's a way that you can take the extraneous problem and solve it independently and still choose that school. But if, on the other hand, you were to discover that that school was, teaching Scientology, to where if you got your education there, you would be miseducated and you wind up with this really bizarre impression of the world, then that goes right to the heart of what you want from a college that you pick. So that disadvantage that you would be miseducated and you would wind up wildly irrational, that's an intrinsic disadvantage that you couldn't solve just by tinkering around the edges. So affirmatives would say, let's say you ran a disadvantage, the affirmative plan is controversial, so it sucks up political capital, and then Congress can't ratify whatever the latest free trade agreement is because there's resistance from some members of Congress in the Rust Belt states. Well, affirmatives would say, not intrinsic, this is not a reason not to reform revenue generation policy or reform the criminal justice system. It's just a reason that Congress should go ahead and ratify that free trade agreement. It doesn't go to the heart of why the plan needs to be done. It doesn't go to the heart of this particular subject matter. It had a lot to do with the idea that the resolution was the focus of debate, which opened its own can of worms, and that's one of the ways that negatives would get at it. They would say, you want to be sure that you want to start a resolution is the focus debate with us before you make this argument. Negatives would also say things like, oh, it makes the plan a moving target. We don't have to prove that the disadvantage is intrinsic to topical action. We just have to prove that it's a consequence. It's something that happens as a result of the plan. And then they would say things like, intrinsicness answers make the plan a moving target. We look at the 1AC plan when crafting our strategy. We have no idea what your imagination is going to come up with as far as intrinsicness answers. And then they'd talk about how it could lead to infinite regress, to where in the first negative there might be a disadvantage, and in the second affirmative there'd be an intrinsicness answer. Well, what if the second negative runs a disadvantage to that intrinsicness answer? Well, then the 1AR could just make an intrinsicness answer to that disadvantage, and the chain keeps going, and because the 2AR speaks last, the argument never gets resolved. I mean, the real answer to it was there's no such thing as an intrinsicness, there's no such thing as an intrinsic disadvantage. If you're only limited by your imagination how the impact of the disadvantage can be solved, then the negative is so tightly constrained there are almost no arguments they can make. So that argument, it sort of sorted itself out by the end of the time that I was a college debater, and we didn't hear about it much after that, but there's this one funny story. And it involved a couple of debaters from Loyola Marymount, one of them by the name of Madison Laird, who I think is currently running a software company. He was the last time I heard anything about him. It was at the Dartmouth tournament, and they were debating a Northwestern team that was very, very good, that Madison and Paul, his partner, were not really that likely to beat, and they had been wanting to do this for fun. So their affirmative in that round, they said that they were going to fire the Undersecretary of State for African Affairs. This was on the topic that was change foreign policy toward one or more nations in Africa. So they were going to fire the Undersecretary of State for African Affairs, and they had a bunch of evidence saying he was really bad at his job, but they were going to replace him with the two of them. And then their strategy was, whatever disadvantages Northwestern wanted to run, they would just make intrinsicness answers. They would say, we are the ones who are going to occupy the office, so we'll just tell you what we're going to do. And so Northwestern runs Sino-American rapprochement. In other words, relations between China and the United States will get better as a result of the plan, and that will cause the Soviet Union, which hadn't fallen yet, to feel encircled, and that leads to war. Well, so Madison in the 2AC says, not intrinsic, we'll just yell racial slurs at the Chinese. Well, so then Gordon Mitchell in the second negative, he runs a China backlash dissent on that, and Paul Derby in the 1AR, he says, not intrinsic. We just won't yell them very loudly. Will you yell them in a friendly tone? And I don't remember what issue the debate actually wound up turning on. Northwestern won the debate naturally, but that I think kind of gets to the point of how silly the whole intrinsicness answer thing is. So if you ever hear someone talk about a disadvantage being not intrinsic, that's what they're talking about. They're saying that topical action could still be carried out and that disadvantage eliminated. That disadvantage doesn't go to the core of what the debate is about. And it's kind of a flawed argument, but now if you ever hear it, at least you'll know what you're up against. And maybe you can come up with something as creative as Loyola's approach for dealing with it or even for answering it.